I'm going to take a few moments and introduce you to a case. A gentleman by the name of Operational Sam. This is what he called himself. This is how he referred to himself. 34-year-old male, married, father of two, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. Raised with an intact family during his childhood. His mother was an untreated survivor of childhood abuse, so she wasn't able to regulate his nervous system, and she suffered with chronic dissociation. So she was chronically in a dorsal state, disconnected, kind of gone. And Dad was very passive and also not very present. It had an impact on Sam's autonomic nervous system, and he suffered his first panic attack when he was 10 years old. And panic attack continues for years, never got any treatment. Lost his faith in heaven. He was raised in the church, lost his faith in heaven. And he developed the belief that he needed to be competent and prepared in every situation in his life, which drove him to become a paramedic, a trainer in search and rescue, and working on ambulance and firefighter. So he was an adrenaline junkie. He loves blood and gore. He couldn't get enough of the work. He loved the culture of first responders, very much connected, kind of band of brothers thing. There were sisters there too. And had the belief, like comes in that culture a lot, if you're emotional, you're being weak and you're soft. Getting help was a sign of weakness. During a training activity, he was at a training experience, and they were learning to take EEGs on each other. And during the training, they did an EKG on him and discovered that his EKG was extreme, and they were concerned he was going to stroke out right there. And he had no clue. He felt fine. So they sent him to the ER to rule out an extreme cardiac event. He'd been experiencing chest pains over a period of time of late, insomnia, not feeling like himself. For a significant period of time, he experienced chronic anxiety, panic attacks, distraught, emotionally fragile, irrational grieving for victims he attended on ambulance calls and search and rescue events. He was afraid of this subconscious. Now, all this is while he's trying to be a husband and a dad. He was afraid of the subconscious and images from work that got stuck in his head. Nightmares, he had frequent nightmares of horrific scenes. He became worried about being emotionally fragile. He wasn't able to be still or to tolerate silence, so he could never achieve that ventral dorsal state of stillness. Silence led to catastrophizing, so as soon as things got quiet, really bad thoughts and images and fears of what could happen came up in his mind, so a lot of sympathetic activation got kicked up. He wasn't able to achieve any restful state. He wasn't able to transition from awake to asleep, fearing the images. And this happens with a lot of trauma survivors. That period of laying down to go to sleep and transitioning from awake to asleep, one is it requires ventral dorsal quieting of your system. And for a lot of chronic trauma survivors, that period is where things start popping up. So a lot of folks find other ways, adaptive mechanism, things that work. They get drunk until they pass out. They stay awake and get exhausted until they pass out. They just try not to sleep anymore. So what he did was because he couldn't transition, he stayed awake until he got exhausted. Then he passed over into the transition of sleep. He found alcohol to be helpful, but he didn't abuse it. He used alcohol sometimes to prevent himself from being able to take an ambulance call, so he couldn't say no. So if he drank and he got a call, then it was like, oh, sorry, can't go on the call because I had a few drinks. He wasn't able to set any boundaries in his life. He was on call 24/7 in his head. He realized he'd rather have been on call than being with his family. He realized he was addicted to the adrenaline dump. Previously, no boundaries regarding work, wasn't present with his kids. He experienced FOMO, that fear of missing out, on an ambulance call. So he'd listen to the radio all the time. Everything with his family became an ambulance situation or call on his head. So he would be with his family, and he was constantly thinking about what would happen if, or, ooh, this would be a good location for a training exercise. Oh, so if my kid fell and this happened, this is probably what we'd do, which really gets in the way of just being present with your family. If he'd think about, for example, if his child fell here, how he would respond. If they got into a car crash, how would he respond? This hike or this location, he lives in the Black Hills, goes out on hiking trips with his family, and is constantly in the state of first responder search and rescue, which his nervous system would constantly be in this adrenaline flood, which not much ventral, then he couldn't connect and engage. So he came into therapy. He'd contemplated therapy for 2 years, finally came into therapy, and his goals were to resolve the anxiety and the panic attacks, to be able to be present with his family, to integrate and resolve past traumatic experiences. So for treatment, there's an auditory training program called the Safe and Sound Protocol, which is just music. So ventral, vagal, and this information's in the handouts. Ventral is connected to everything in the face, and it's a face-heart connection. Well, everything in your ears is part of ventral. When you Safe and Sound Protocol is run through an algorithm where it takes out the high frequencies and the low frequencies. And so it's familiar music. It's passive. You just listen to it. It's familiar music. But because it's filtered, your ear has to stretch a bit. That stretch activates ventral, which exercises ventral, and then through neuroplasticity, the process of what we stimulate changes, ventral gets stronger. It's simply a music program. So Sam did Safe and Sound Protocol. There's a really fantastic app called the 7-Minute Chi, and it's Tai Chi. It's got a 7-minute workout. It's got 4 programs, 2 of them are free. And so he was able to come more into his body, to begin to perceive his body more, and to be able to get more into a ventral dorsal kind of state with some sympathetic energy through movement. And we trained him, taught him about his nervous system, did some exercises for him did the notice a name, had him begin to perceive and tune into his nervous system more. He became more safely embodied, came out of his head and was able to come into his body more. He was increasingly able to monitor his states, his shifting states of his nervous system. He was more able to detect what did his nervous system need. He was more able to regulate his nervous system. He was more able to participate in relationships and experience co-regulation, so he could co-regulate his kids. He could allow his wife to co-regulate him. He could participate in co-regulation with all his peers in his work. He was able to resolve anxiety, no more panic attacks, and he did more what's called bottom-up versus top-down intervention, so I'll talk about it in a minute. So that happened in 10 sessions. Now, EMDR is an amazingly powerful tool, and that happens really fast, too. There are things, our body, our brains know how to heal themselves. They get stuck because of trauma. When you provide the right conditions, it will automatically, one of the things that describes the complex system nature of our brain and our body is that they are self-organizing, meaning if you create the right conditions, they will move towards health on their own. Our brain and our body know what they need to do, counter to what our medical profession believes. Our brain and body knows how to heal itself. If we create the right conditions of safety and of adequate regulation and co-regulation, it'll move towards health. So 10 sessions of individual psychotherapy with an autonomic nervous system focus. Currently not experiencing any anxiety or panic attacks. Sleep has improved. More able to be husband and dad. He knew I was doing this, and I asked him if I could use him as a case, and he referred to Operational Sam. that Operational Sam ran his life. Mission 1 was all his life was. And now he's got much more Mission 2 and much more Mission 3. He's more embodied and less in his head. He's more emotionally flexible. He's able to be sad and grieve when he was. So one of the things that happens, so for much of my life, I could, like dorsal was death. I could not go there. I needed to move and take action. As I have tuned my nervous system more, what happens now is I have a lot more ventral energy in my system. I can tolerate when there is an event that brings grief or sadness. I'd never grieved in my life before. I can now go down into grief, not consciously, not intentionally, but it's there. I can move down. I can feel that sadness. I can feel that grief anchored in ventral. Got enough ventral energy that I'm not losing it, freaking out, or having to run away, or getting overwhelmed with the grief. I can move into the grief. I can feel it. My body metabolizes it through, boom, off and running. So Sam is more emotionally flexible. He talked about, he went on a call and he didn't know who the patient was. Someone had died on the local bike trail. He comes up to the scene. He manages and directs all of the ambulance service and search and rescue. He comes onto the scene and he discovers that it's his neighbor, someone that he was close with. And he was able to move in and out of grief. He was able to get his job done. He was able to allocate tasks and services, delegate. But he was also able to feel. He brought the wife home from the trail because she was there when the husband died. He brought her home. He was able to grieve with her. He was able to feel sadness. He was able to go home, feel the sadness. And then he got back and did the job. He brought the wife to the funeral home, got the details taken care of. He was able to flexibly move up and down the autonomic ladder as the situations demanded. He could much flexibly move through based on what was needed. He's able to now do all 3 missions more than he ever had. And he's now, because he can tolerate the emotion that comes up and the feelings from traumatic experiences and from past, because he's got more ventral on board, he can now do the traumatic process that he never could do before. Because before any of that stuff came up, overwhelm his system, shut it down, kick him into operational SAM. Now he can sit with it. His nervous system can tolerate it. It can stay engaged, and now he can do the trauma process. And so that's next steps. So, well-being. Well-being is not just the reduction or removal or absence of cues of danger, but it's also actively experiencing cues of safety that our autonomic nervous system needs. We need both and. So we definitely need to reduce cues of danger in our nervous system. But for those of us who haven't exercised ventral enough, we also need to stimulate ventral. And there are some really simple things that we can do. And I'm actually going to come back to this. The more you exercise ventral, so Deb Dana, who brought this work out of the lab and into the world, talks about glimmers. Glimmers are micro moments of ventral. So when I was sitting here earlier on the break and you brought your dog down, I grew up with dogs. I love dogs. German Shepherds are my favorite dog. This dog is freaking gorgeous. That was a moment of ventral in my nervous system. I could feel the energy in my nervous system. Beyond my little conflict with Celia, she was just my conflict, she was fine. My nervous system just settled. We do what's called savoring. You take that experience. One is you learn to look for glimmers. You talk about hunting what? Hunting the good. From a nervous system perspective, hunting the good is searching for glimmers, micro moments of ventral. It can be the smile on a child's face. It can be the smell. For me, being back in New England, I grew up in New England, live in South Dakota. The only fall foliage we have is yellow aspens. That's it. They're pretty, but it's not here. Here, your hills look like a bowl of tricks. And that is a ventral moment to my nervous system. So finding glimmers, finding little micro moments. It could be your first cup of coffee. It could be the smell of coffee. It can be this morning we walked out of the hotel or out to lunch, and the sun and the warmth and the temperature, that was a glimmer. That was a micro moment of ventral. You want to notice those, capture them, and you just deepen into that experience for no more than 30 seconds, because after that it turns, for some people 5 seconds, and it turns. You capture that moment of ventral, and you just exercise it in your system just for a moment, then you just move on. That little micro moment of exercising ventral begins to activate more of that in your nervous system. Again, what we activate gets stronger. I want to talk a minute regarding treatment, about the medical model versus the brain model. Our society is dominated by the medical model. Boy, there are paths I could go down with that, but I won't. The medical model is a model of pathology. It sees everything as illness, disease, brokenness, and their approach is medicine, surgery, blah, blah, blah. And their view is that this is something wrong going on in your body, in your body, some illness, some disease process, and they're going to fix it. And if they can fix it, great, good luck. If they can't, sorry, good luck. You just go on with their life. The brain model, and this is relevant and applicable both in medicine, but also in mental health and education. The brain model is that what we see is an adaptation. It is the best adaptation this nervous system and brain knew how to make based on their circumstances. So an alcoholic, the best adaptation this system knew how to make, they're still responsible. But alcohol worked. For me, for decades, drugs worked. It settled my nervous system, it quieted my mind, it settled the fears, it calmed me inside. It's adaptive. The medical model sees me as having a disease or having a pathology or a brokenness. And and today, A to Z, anything you can think of, they're going to have a pill for it. Kind of ironic, they're going to give me a pill to get me off of pills, but whatever. Different kind of pills, different money source, all of that. So the brain model, especially in therapy, is that we don't look at it as pathology. We look at it as adaptation. We get curious, what is it that made this nervous system need to do this? And what is it helping? How is it beneficial to the system? Because even though it's causing all kinds of problems, from the nervous system's perspective, it is adaptive and helpful in some way. And body-based therapies, brain-body-based therapies like EMDR and sensory motor psychotherapy, other therapies that are brain and body-based, adopt much more of a brain model versus a pathology medical model. Benefits of autonomic flexibility. So when we tune our nervous system through SSP, through 7-minute chi, through meditation, through blah, 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 any multitude of things, through finding and exercising glimmers, we increase our ability to inhibit distractions, because with more ventral on board, more well-tuned system, I'll have more ventral. My medial prefrontal cortex, my attentional system, my executive processing systems will work better, so I can control where my attention goes. I'm more resilient regarding stress. I have a subjective sense, my own sense that I'm better. I feel better, more of a sense of well-being. Increased capacity for friendship and connection. Again, ventral is a social engagement system. The more ventral you have on board, the more you are naturally driven to connect. Even if you have adaptive parts of you that have been like, no, I hate people and I don't want to be around anyone. However, that biological drive to connect will come forward more with more ventral energy. You're not going to jump in and be maybe the life of the party or, join in a men's group or something, but you might engage more than what you did when you have more ventral energy on board, when you have a more well-tuned nervous system. You seek out more social support. your perception of your social acceptance changes. Remember the story of 3 states, or the story follows states. As I'm more disconnected, if I'm more sympathetic or dorsal, my story about how socially acceptable or valuable or likable, it changes. It's a negative story when I'm down in these 2 protective or defensive states. Up here, I'm like, not like the party, but not a schmuck. People like me more than not. Down here, different story. I have more compassion. Medically, I will have reduced inflammation, more regulatory of the inflammatory cytokines. So medicine is recognizing more and more that what underlies multitude of illnesses is inflammation. There's a whole new area called biopsychiatry. Kind of shocking it's taking this long, but many psychiatrists are recognizing like, oh, things that happen in the body contribute to mental illness. Inflammation is one. So you reduce those inflammatory cytokines with a more regulated, well-tuned nervous system. It controls better control of the immune response and much greater emotional regulation. I want to talk for a minute about top-down versus bottom-up. Our culture is very oriented to left brain, to our thinking, much more than we are to our emotions, to our feeling states. In fact, all kinds of beliefs. Emotions get in the way. Emotions are a nuisance. Just put them away. Leave your emotions at the door. Right. Good luck with that. Many of our therapies, not the stuff that these guys practice or what I practice, but I practiced this way for many, many years. Many of our therapies are insight-oriented therapies. They are left brain. So we're going to get together. You're going to tell me what your problem is. I'm going to ask you questions about your history, and I'm going to tell you why you're that way. I'm going to give you insight. And then the theory is, with that insight, you can change. I know why I be a jerk. I understand all the reasons. I know the path that got me there. Sometimes I still be a jerk. It isn't, so top down is where I use my logical, reasonable, rational left brain to manage the activation in my body. Top-down control. If I am not significantly activated in here, if I'm not flashed back into the past, if I'm not in a really dysregulated sympathetic or dorsal state, I can use my higher brain to regulate my nervous system. If I'm really activated here, if I'm dissociated, if I'm having flashbacks, if I'm having night terrors, I can't adequately activate these systems to settle this. So I couldn't, so bottom-up strategies are where we come into the body and the nervous system. But you have to learn to be able to perceive your nervous system and to be able to be in your body to then start to notice the dysregulation and to use practices like breathing and other practices to settle your nervous system. And then your higher brain comes back online. Now you can do more top-down interventions. So if you choose to go to therapy, and if all you're getting is insight-oriented therapy, and they're not doing anything with you regarding body or any of that kind of stuff, and if it's working, great. If you feel good in the relationship and it's beneficial, stay. If it's not, and you're like, well, I'm really trying positive and I'm really thinking and I still get activated, it isn't you. You're attempting top-down management and solutions with a problem that's here in your body, and you need to use body-based kinds of practices, mind-body kinds of practices. Again, we are biologically wired to connect. Co-regulation, we are inextricably linked, nervous system to nervous system. So, for many of us, there are some who believe that one of the significant things that underlies addictions is attachment difficulties, is attachment disorders, the inability to connect to others. I'm doing a bunch of work in schools, and one of my consultants had this quote, I don't know where it comes from, and it's something like, every kid needs to feel a part of the village. If they don't feel a part of the village, they're going to burn it down. We need to be connected. So attachment wounds, attachment trauma that underlies many difficulties is one of the illnesses. Attachment and repair and connection is the medicine. The most powerful medicine we have is attachment, is our ability to attach to each other, to experience a co-regulating relationship where we help each other stay regulated. One of the things happening in our society today, it's been happening for a while, we can't have disagreements. We cannot have discussions about Trump or Biden, about guns or no guns, about trans or not trans for 5-year-olds, about any multitude of things. We can't talk about it. Because if we're on opposite sides, our nervous systems get dysregulated, we move into a defensive state, we have no co-regulating conversations, and we can't understand each other, and immediately story is, oh, you're one of those. Got it. And then I'm in a defensive state and disconnected from you. We have got to develop the ability to co-regulate, to self-regulate, and then to co-regulate so we can have really difficult, complicated conversations. So I live in South Dakota. I grew up in Massachusetts, grew up in a very liberal family, lived in Maine for a decade and a half. My dad was a doctor, no guns, no motorcycles, none of that kind of stuff. Moved to South Dakota, kind of nothing but guns. Well, guns and cows, loads of meat, loads of steak. It's a very different culture. And as the shooting happened here, which it just breaks my heart what's going on, we had conversations about gun control and about weapons and the Second Amendment, and we're pretty regulated with each other, and we don't necessarily have the same opinion, but we could get curious about each other's opinion because we could bring ventral, self-regulating energy and get curious and go, well, what about this, though? Well, what about this? Instead of dropping down into a defensive state with no ventral, and then that's it. We are just too different. We have got to get back to the place where we can talk to each other. When you think about, to emphasize my point about co-regulation, when you think about your important relationships in your life, bring up an image, a memory of when they're going well. And how does everything feel? Then bring up an image or a memory when it's not, when you're experiencing a rupture in relationship, which happens to all of us. The key is not to not have ruptures, it's to recognize a rupture and to be able to get right on it and make a repair. But feel in your own nervous system, what does it feel like as you bring up a memory of connection or of rupture? The nature of what goes on inside of you tells you what's right, what's needed. So I'm going to take you through an exercise. There is a circuit between ventral and sympathetic. It is only here, it is not here. And this circuit goes from up here somewhere, like, not a doctor, or I'm just a psychologist, not a real doctor. So it's here, and it connects to the sinoatrial node in our heart. It's the pacemaker. And the function of the vagal brake is to regulate sympathetic, okay? So when you start to feel activated, and it can be activated, energized, like, boy, here we go, you're feeling the vagal brake is letting go, it's easing off, and it is allowing more sympathetic energy to come into your system, okay? When you've got too much coming in, you can use box breathing, extended exhales, which bring more ventral. You can use any number of things. And what you're doing is you're applying the vagal brake, which is now decreasing the sympathetic energy in your system. And the vagal brake all day is doing that. Applying, letting go, applying, easing up, applying, easing up. As I need to change and move through the world, sometimes I need a little more sympathetic energy, sometimes I need a little less. And my vagal brake, it applies and it lets go, applies and it lets go, and regulates how much energy is in my system. Sometimes something happens where it activates my nervous system, so I have this little, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. I can feel the vagal brake letting go. Sometimes when Israel got attacked, I felt my vagal brake like fully let go. I didn't go into a panic attack, but I was like, uh-oh, this is really bad. I used to work at the Maine School for the Deaf on Mackworth Isle in Portland, Falmouth, and my first day there was 9/11, which was a pretty overwhelming day. And so we all have a vagal brake. Some people think their vagal brake's broken, but it's not. When you get a shock or you get overwhelmed in your sensory system, you get scared or you get angry, your vagal brake has essentially let go, and now sympathetic, it's kicked off the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, flooding your system with cortisol and adrenaline, and now you're in either a sympathetic state or you drop down in dorsal and ventral's offline, essentially offline. It is not regulating your system. Again, through neuroplasticity, what we exercise gets stronger. So I'm going to walk you through an exercise where you can come up with a visualization for your own vagal brake. And if you exercise the vagal brake, this gentleman I work with, long history of trauma, military, first session, taught him the vagal brake. He came back in 2 weeks. He was blown away by his ability to begin to start to downregulate his rage, his anger, to regulate his nervous system. So I'm going to invite you all to come up with your own vagal brake. What you want to come up with is an image, and you can let it emerge from your nervous system, like, oh, okay, what would it be? You want something that is regulating, meaning some mechanism. So you don't want an on-off switch. Some people use a dial. Some people use a window. They open it, which increases the sympathetic energy. They close it, and it decreases it. We're going to use your imagination and visualization, okay? So some people use doors. One gentleman uses French doors. He opens them. More sympathetic energy comes into the system. He imagines closing them, and he decreases the sympathetic energy in the system. There's an older lady who I work with. The more sensory parts you bring into your imagination, the stronger the tool will be for you, the stronger the imagery will be for you. This older woman that I work with, she has a crank window in her house, and her vagal brake is she cranks open the window, and she'll do it with her hand. And as it opens, she can feel the breeze. She can hear the traffic. She can see the curtains moving. And there's more sympathetic rush into her system. And then when she needs to downregulate it, she imagines and she turns, she closes the window. She can see the window starting to close. She can feel the crank. The noise of the traffic diminishes. The curtains start to settle. And it decreases sympathetic energy. So take a moment. Again, trust whatever comes to your nervous system. You can change your vagal brake later. Come up with some imagery, not a light switch, something that you can regulate, up or down, on or off, open, close. And you want to bring that imagery to mind, really expand it. If it's a window, like what does the window look like? What's the frame? Does it have curtains? Really expand it in your mind. Let your imagination play with this. And then imagine playing with it. Either open and imagine feeling an increased rush of energy in your system. Close it, imagine it calms it. Open it again, just play with it. See if you can regulate if you can feel the energy regulating in your system, opening and closing a bit. Trust whatever you perceive. Trust your nervous system. And now I invite you to take a situation, a small irritant, nothing that's related to health or safety. Imagine on a scale of 0 to 10, pick a 3, something that's a 3 of intensity, some annoyance, some troublesome, irksome thing. Not a 7, 8, 9, or a 10, because then we got to do a whole other deal with that. 3 or a 4. Bring it to consciousness. Bring the memory and activate it. Notice what it does in your body. Then imagine applying your vagal brake to down-regulate the irritation or activation that gets kicked up into your system. Just play with it. If you exercise your vagal brake with your imagination, you do this 10 times a day, 20 times a day, you are strengthening this network. Consciously and intentionally, you are strengthening this network. And then this network will, on its own, in the background, work more efficiently, doing what it's supposed to do, applying, releasing, and you can do it on demand. So my vagal brake, I grew up as a sailor, my vagal brake is in a sailboat, and when you pull sails in, the boat goes faster, I can hear the water, I can feel the rush. When I need to slow it down, I imagine easing the sails out, I can let the lines out. The boat settles, and my nervous system adjusts. I've been doing this imagery with vagal brake for a number of years now, and I can activate it and really let those sails out, and it will regulate my system more. So neuroplasticity, what you stimulate gets stronger. You play with your vagal brake and exercise it, you will notice significant benefit. Little gift from Deb Dana to you.